teenage baseball player steps onto the field for what seems like an ordinary day. He's focused, confident, thinking about practice. Then something goes horribly wrong. A bat slips from another player's hands. It flies across the field and crashes directly into his face. His skull fractures. His brain begins to swell. For a moment, his future becomes uncertain. Doctors rush him to the hospital. His family fears the worst. And when he finally begins recovering, even simple tasks feel difficult. Reading is harder. Remembering things is harder. Living a normal life is harder. Most people would see this as the moment their life changed forever. And they would be right, but not for the reason you think. Because years later, that same teenager would discover an idea so powerful that it would help millions of people transform their lives. Not through motivation, not through willpower, not through some secret shortcut, but through something so small that most people ignore completely. That teenager was James Clear. And this is the story behind Atomic Habits, a book that challenges almost everything we believe about success. Because according to James Clear, the difference between success and failure is often not one massive decision. It's the tiny choices you repeat every day. Think about that. Most people spend their lives waiting for a breakthrough. They wait for the perfect moment, the perfect opportunity, the perfect burst of motivation. They tell themselves, next month I'll get serious. Next year I'll change. One day, everything will be different. But what if real change doesn't happen that way? What if your future isn't being shaped by the big decisions you make once, but by the small decisions you make every single day? That's the question at the heart of this book. And to understand the answer, we need to talk about a cycling team that nobody expected to win anything. For nearly a century, British cycling was mediocre. They weren't feared. They weren't dominant. They weren't even taken seriously. In fact, things became so bad that one bicycle manufacturer reportedly refused to sell bikes to the British team because they worried it would hurt their reputation. Imagine that. A team so unsuccessful that companies didn't want to be associated with them. Then everything changed. A new coach arrived. His name was Dave Brailsford. People expected dramatic changes. A revolutionary training program, a groundbreaking strategy, some secret advantage. Instead, he focused on something that sounded almost ridiculous. Improve everything by just 1%. 1% better seats. 1% better nutrition. 1% better sleep. 1% better training environments. 1% better recovery. Nothing dramatic. Nothing exciting. Just tiny improvements. Again, and again, and again. Most people would have laughed. How could 1% possibly matter? But that's exactly what makes this story so fascinating. Because a few years later, British cycling dominated the Olympics. They won multiple Tour de France titles. They shattered records. And suddenly everyone wanted to know the same thing. What happened? The answer wasn't talent. The answer wasn't luck. The answer was accumulation. Tiny improvements, repeated consistently, compounding over time. And this is where James Clear introduces one of the most important ideas in the entire book. Habits are the compound interest of self-improvement. At first, habits seem insignificant. Read 10 pages today. Nothing changes. Skip one workout. Nothing changes. Eat one unhealthy meal. Nothing changes. And that's exactly why habits are so dangerous and so powerful, because the consequences are delayed. Imagine two airplanes leaving the same airport. One changes its direction by just a few degrees. At first, the difference is invisible. But after hundreds or thousands of miles, those planes arrive in completely different destinations. Human behavior works the same way. Tiny choices, tiny actions, tiny habits. Over time, They create enormous differences. The problem is, most people quit before they see the results. And that's because they encounter what James Clear calls the valley of disappointment. Picture an ice cube sitting in a cold room. The room is 25 degrees. Nothing happens. 26. Still nothing. 27. Nothing. 28. Nothing. 29. Nothing. 30. Still nothing. If you were watching, you might conclude that all the effort is pointless, that nothing is changing. But then the temperature reaches 32 degrees, and suddenly the ice begins to melt. Now here's the important question. Was it the final degree that caused the transformation? No. The breakthrough happened because of every degree that came before it, even the ones that appear to accomplish nothing. Your habits work exactly the same way. You study, you train, you improve, you stay consistent. And for a long time, nothing seems different. No visible results. No dramatic transformation. No proof that it's working. That's the moment when most people stop. And that's why most people never experience the rewards of compounding. But those who continue, those who trust the process, eventually reach the point where progress becomes visible. And when that happens, it often looks like success arrived overnight. But it didn't. It was quietly being built behind the scenes all along. And that brings us to one of the biggest misconceptions people have about change. Most people think habits are about achieving goals. Lose 10 kilograms. Read 50 books. Earn more money. Build a business. Get better grades. And there's nothing wrong with goals. Goals give us direction. But James Clear argues that goals are not what truly changes people. In fact, two people can have exactly the same goal and end up with completely different results. Think about it. Every athlete wants to win. Every student wants good grades. Every entrepreneur wants success. The goal isn't what separates people. So what does? Identity. The kind of person you believe you are. And this is where Atomic Habits becomes much deeper than a typical self-improvement book. Because James Clear argues that lasting change happens when you stop focusing on what you want to achieve and start focusing on who you want to become. Imagine two people are offered a cigarette. The first person says, "I'm trying to quit." The second person says, "I'm not a smoker." At first, those statements sound almost identical, but they're not. The first person is still fighting their old identity. The second person has already adopted a new one. And that difference changes everything. Because every action you take is casting a vote for the person you're becoming. Every workout is a vote. Every page you read is a vote. Every focused study session is a vote. Every healthy meal is a vote. No single action transforms your identity overnight, but repeated actions create evidence. And eventually, you start believing it. A person doesn't become disciplined because they say they are disciplined. They become disciplined because they've collected hundreds of small pieces of evidence that prove it. This is why identity-based habits are so powerful. Instead of asking, "What do I want to achieve?" ask, "Who do I want to become?" Because when your habits align with your identity, consistency becomes much easier. But even when people understand this, they still struggle. And that raises an important question. If habits are so powerful, why do good habits feel difficult and bad habits feel effortless? The answer lies in something most of us rarely notice. Our environment. Think about your phone for a second. How many times have you picked it up today without even thinking? Maybe you weren't bored. Maybe you weren't looking for anything specific. Maybe it was simply there. Visible, accessible, easy. And that's exactly how habits work. We often assume our behavior is controlled by motivation, but much of our behavior is controlled by our surroundings. James Clear calls this the first law of behavior change. Make it obvious, because the cues around you shape the actions you take. Imagine trying to eat healthier. You place fruit inside a drawer. You leave cookies on the kitchen counter. What happens? Most people don't choose based on logic. They choose based on visibility. The easier something is to notice, the more likely you are to do it. That's why successful habit change often starts with redesigning your environment. Want to read more? Place a book on your pillow. Want to study? Keep your workspace clean and distraction-free. Want to stop wasting time on your phone? Move distracting apps off your home screen. Small changes, big impact. Because sometimes the battle isn't against laziness. It's against your environment. But visibility alone isn't enough. Even obvious habits can fail. And that leads to the second law. Make it attractive. Here's something fascinating about the human brain. We repeat what feels rewarding, and we avoid what feels unpleasant. Simple, but incredibly powerful. The problem is that many good habits feel difficult at the beginning. Exercise requires effort. Studying requires effort. Saving money requires sacrifice. Meanwhile, scrolling social media, watching videos, eating junk food, these provide instant rewards. So how do you make good habits more attractive? One strategy is something James Clear calls temptation bundling. Pair something you need to do with something you want to do. Maybe you only listen to your favorite podcast while exercising. Maybe you enjoy a special coffee while studying. Suddenly the habit becomes associated with something positive. And there's another factor that's even stronger. People, whether we realize it or not, we copy the behaviors of those around us. If everyone around you values growth, growth starts to feel normal. If everyone around you values discipline, discipline starts to feel natural, which means one of the fastest ways to improve your habits is to improve your environment and the people within it. Now let's talk about the third law. And this one might be the most important of all. Make it easy. Most people fail because they make habits too difficult. They decide to read 50 pages a day, work out for 2 hours, wake up at 5 in the morning, transform their entire life in a single week. And for a few days, it works. Then reality arrives. Motivation fades. Life gets busy. And everything falls apart. James Clear offers a surprisingly simple alternative. Lower the barrier. Make the habit so easy that you can't say no. Want to start reading? Read 1 page. Want to exercise? Do 2 minutes. Want to meditate? Start with 1 minute. It sounds almost ridiculous. And that's exactly why it works. Because the goal isn't to become amazing on day one. The goal is to become consistent. Success begins with showing up again and again and again. Because once you start, momentum becomes your ally. And finally, we arrive at the fourth law. Make it satisfying. This law explains something fundamental about human nature. We repeat behaviors that feel good, and we avoid behaviors that feel bad. The challenge is that most good habits have delayed rewards. Exercise pays off later. Studying pays off later. Saving money pays off later. But your brain wants results now. So create immediate satisfaction. Track your progress. Mark completed days. Celebrate consistency. Notice your wins. Not because they are huge, but because they reinforce the behavior. And reinforcement creates repetition. And repetition creates habits. And habits create your future. So after everything we've discussed, the recovery story, the cyclists, the valley of disappointment, identity, the 4 laws, what is the real message of atomic habits? It's this. You do not rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems. That's one of the most famous ideas in the entire book, and perhaps one of the most important, because goals tell you where you want to go, but systems determine whether you get there. The quality of your future is hidden inside the quality of your daily habits, not the dramatic moments, not the motivational speeches, not the New Year's resolutions, the ordinary actions, repeated consistently, day after day, month after month, year after year. So before you click away, take a moment and think about the person you want to become 1 year from now. Not 5 years, not 10, just 1 year. What would that version of you look like? What would they do differently? What habits would they have? Now ask yourself one final question. What's the smallest action you could take today to become a little more like that person? Not tomorrow, not next week, today. Because the truth is, Your future isn't built in a single moment. It's built through tiny decisions, tiny improvements, tiny habits, repeated again and again and again until one day you look back and realize those small actions weren't small at all. They were the reason everything changed.